Welcome to Lecture 2A, Introduction to Construction Management. Today's topic is going to be on managing construction projects. Some of the learning outcomes that we're going to be discussing will include describing the elements of project management in construction. There's a lot of common elements to project management that doesn't matter what the type of project, but we will definitely tie this to construction management. Describe the importance of systems and processes in construction project management and how that can ensure repetitive or repeated success. And some of the key roles, that'll come in particularly in Lecture 2B, the key roles of project managers and related roles that you'll find on construction sites, and how they integrate, how they organize themselves, what the job roles are, and why they're there. Okay, so I'm Tom Stephenson, and we'll be starting our lecture. So there's always these questions about, well, what exactly is a project? And people kind of have this idea in their head what a project is. So some of the common things you have to think about with a project is it's a temporary endeavor. Manufacturing cars, that's a more process-oriented, repetitive kind of job, and that's sort of operational and day-to-day, and things keep happening over and over again. Setting up an assembly line, that would be more of a project than running an assembly line. But constructing anything is more temporary, because when you're done, you're finished, and then you go on to some other project, and you assemble a team for this project, and then they kind of disperse to other projects when that project gets completed. So it'll have a start and a finish. Well, if it's temporary, it's going to start at some point and it's going to finish at some point. Unique one time, generally speaking, like this is a community center under construction here in Toronto near Shepherd Avenue between Bayview and Leslie. Near the 401. It's a temporary endeavor. It's one time. There's not going to be another community center that's going to be exactly the same. Might be very similar ones, and even a house. There might be very similar houses. You might have the same design, but it's going to be on a different lot. It will have been built during a different time period in the year, under different weathering conditions. People would probably have selected different interior finishes for it. So there's a lot of variables that change. So unique in one time. Brings about change. So there's always changes that occur from the original project plan. It's never perfect. There's always going to be things that was missed, or things you change your mind on, or maybe external forces make you change your mind on things. I could imagine, after the pandemic, some of the office buildings that are being constructed, there's probably been some changes to make them more resilient during those kind of events. And has unknown unknowns. We'll talk about that in another class. And actually, if you really want to get down deep into it, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I've got a bunch of more in-depth lectures, tools, techniques, and metal models. If you go to that playlist, you'll see some more in-depth discussions in areas like that. But an unknown is something we don't know. It happens, and then after it happens, we can figure it out. But before it happens, it's kind of difficult to have planned for it. Really, that's kind of the definition of construction-based projects. It's really kind of the definition of all kinds of projects as well when you think about it. So a project is defined whether it is in construction or not. As I said, it has a defined goal. What's the end game? To quote Marvel Comics, what are we after? What are we trying to end up with at the end of this? And so an example could be Humber River Hospital, Oakville Hospital, big hospital that's going to serve the community, and it's going to be specialized in certain areas. And really the whole project documents, the drawings, the specifications, everything should be coming together to provide and ensure that that end goal is met. And of course, because that's one high level object, it's like, where do we start? Where could we possibly begin with this thing? So you have to break it down from something high level into more detail. And the more detail you get, it's going to be, headings like substructure, superstructure, substructures below ground. And then within substructure, that's going to be broken down. And until you get to the very bottom, you've got single tasks, and somebody has to do the single task. It might be rough in plumbing. Well, the plumber plumbing subcontractor has to do that. So you take this humongous thing and you break it down piece by piece into more and more detail. And then you've got individual things, and you can procure work, assign people to do that work, and then you can monitor it to ensure that it actually gets done within the time frame, cost budgets that you're hoping for. Clients, they have expectations of when something's going to start and when they're going to be able to use it. This picture here is of the waterfront campus at George Brown College. There was definite clear plans of when this would be ready, and students would have been scheduled to be coming into this building. This building indeed was ready. I think it was August 2012 or 13, so they'd be ready for the start of classes that year. And if it wasn't ready, then the client's going to be very upset that it's not ready. So you have to be very cognizant of the time periods and the start and finish dates, because that leads to planning by the clients, obviously leads to planning for you, it leads to cash flow, a whole bunch of issues that come together. And as you can see clearly, there's a lot of people that can be involved, and this is a small amount right here that you're seeing. There can be literally hundreds of people working on a project, even in some cases thousands of people working on a project at any one time. So, and it's the right combination and pulling that together in the right and most efficient way that becomes effective, successful project management. So you really want to build something that satisfies highest and best use. And if you read the first chapter of Understanding Construction Drawings, it discusses highest and best use. You know, a developer or a client, facilities, people, they've got to understand what is the end game, what are we trying to do here, and what's the best use. If I'm a developer and I see a property, what can I get the most out of this property if I build on it, construct on it, and sell it? Where it's going to be the most profitable. If it's a government agency, how's it going to best serve the community, what we do here? So all of those things come into play. And it's unique, as we said, requires significant amount of capital and resources. There's not very many things that are more expensive than construction when you get down to it. We spend money on different things, software systems, this, that, the other thing, but big capital construction projects cost a lot of money to produce. And so you don't want to make any more mistakes than necessary. We all make mistakes and there's always failures, but we want to ensure that we can keep our projects on a successful track as much as possible. So part of that is resources, and resources includes what I just said: money, capital. You know, somebody's got to be paying this money to do this. In this case, this is a development up in Collingwood, Ontario. They call the shipyards. Shipyards was this old tract of land that originally they built ships in Collingwood, and it was a huge business for well over 100 years. You can walk to Millennium Park and you can see all the names of the ships that they built there. And it really resonates with people. Even the Chichiman, which is the ferry ship out of Tobermory to Manitoulin Island, it was built there. But lots of the Great Lakes ships and World War II vessels were built out of there. And so its highest and best use was to build ships for well over 100 years. Well, then after a while it wasn't. And maybe other competing countries started building the ships cheaper, less expensive. So then they didn't stay viable in business. So it kind of closed down and kind of sat there. And it was what you'd consider a brownfield site. There was, you know, toxins in the ground and in the soil. But a developer saw that as potential success for them to be able to do a development. And they remediated the soil, and they redeveloped the land, and they sold the units, and it revitalized the downtown core of Collingwood. And it's still doing construction there. It's been sort of a 10, I guess 12, 13-year process so far. But it changes the environment, the scenery. So but it took a lot of money and capital investment by that developer, and they then sell the units so that they can hopefully make a profit on the units that covers their investment and covers their overhead and provides a certain level of profit for them. That requires the work of a lot of people, salespeople, architects, consultants, engineers. All kinds of studies had to be done for the brownfield aspects, permits and zoning changes, and of course the coordination of all the tradespeople to construct it, and the materials, physical materials, concrete, wood, finished materials, drywall, cabinets, trim, millwork. All of these things have to come together to construct the project. So construction resources and equipment while during construction, and permanent equipment that stays in the units or stays part of the facilities. So those are how those kind of things come together. And it's really, to successfully do that, that's project management, right? That's that whole process of being able to take this vision that somebody has and sees the highest and best use, and then bring that vision into fruition. So it's really the application of a lot of knowledge, skills, tools, techniques, I like to say mental models as well, to project activities that helps you meet the requirements for the project. So that's the main task of a PM, project manager. So if you hear the word PM, or acronym or abbreviation, PM, and that's to plan, schedule, manage, monitor, control those activities, tasks, and resources. So it's kind of like that circle you see down below. Plan, do, check, act. They usually say PDCA. It's something that came out of the Toyota production system, ties to quality control, quality assurance, also known as QCQA. And PDCA means you plan the work, you do the work, you check it, and you see that things aren't quite right, and then you adjust the plan, and you keep going around in that circle. So there's always these iterations that you're doing, replanning, readjusting, continuous improvement into your processes. And that's the role of a project management team and a project manager. And indeed, in construction, a site superintendent also falls under that role. So constructors have to answer a lot of questions. You know, like I said, an example, what are we going to build? What are we trying to build? What is the scope of this project? So what does it include? You really have to nail that down. What are we supposed to be doing? Because it's kind of hard when it's a moving target that you don't know what the full scope is, to contain it within goals and objectives that you're trying to establish. What will it cost? Again, if it's not contained, how do you know what something's going to cost if you don't even know what it is? What are the resources that are required? Well, if you do know what it is, and you don't know what it costs yet, you can identify, break it down into the parts, and then you can start going for procuring the prices and nailing down who's going to do what with contracts. And that's going to give you a really good perspective of what it's going to cost. Or if you're estimating the project to try to get that work, call it pursuit, then you're going to get quotes from subcontractors and suppliers that you're going to put all these quotes together so you can come up with a costing. And then you're going to ensure that your overhead and profit is added on top of that. So what is the total time required? Well, some of that can be laid out in a schedule, and we'll talk about that in another lecture. I think I've got a slide that gives you a perception of that. So you lay out all the activities, you figure out durations, you consult with the various trade partners, and you develop a schedule, and that should tell you how long it's going to take. You'll see a critical path, the longest path through the project. And hopefully that's in alignment with the time period that the client wants. So you're dealing with clients' expectations and what you think can be done. And if you're in pursuit of that work, they better be fairly closely aligned, or you may not get the project. So that breakdown gives you the activities. And when do the individual activities need to start and finish? Well, again, as you're procuring the work, then looking at the schedule, and in negotiations with those trades, you can establish where your best estimate of that is. And then there's going to be iterations, because that's project management. It's constant iterations and adjustments to try to reach the goals. Some things get done faster, some things get done slower, and you have to make adjustments to try to reach time periods, budgets, etc. And, you know, is this client really driven by time, or is it something else that's driving them? Maybe it's cost, maybe it's quality. And so, you know, we can monitor that. And if we are slipping or falling behind, then we can look at how to best get the time back and keep our costs in alignment. So, as I said, there's time, cost, quality, scope, safety. These are like constraints, also goals for the project. And so, what is the quality expectation of the client, and what level, and what are we trying to achieve here, and what risks are we taking? Risks are always there, always evident. So, is it a high probability, high cost risk, or a very low probability, high cost risk, or low probability, low cost risk? You try to have those identified so you can have contingencies in place, so that you'll be able to handle them when they come up. That said, as I mentioned earlier, there's the unknown unknowns, and those things tend to come up out of the blue. We call them a black swan event, or Nassim Taleb has written a book called The Black Swan. It's really these events that come out of nowhere that we can explain after the fact, but before it's kind of hard. So like the 2008 financial crisis, that was considered to be a black swan event. Some people might consider the pandemic to be a black swan event, but that's open for debate, given there was a lot of scientists that felt this was a probability at some point of occurring that was kind of ignored. But again, if you really didn't prepare for it, to you, it would have been a black swan. Excellence in project management requires answering all these questions at some way, shape, or form and level. And the better you understand that, the better that you're able to prepare and plan for your project. Puts you in less reactive mode, more in proactive mode, which is what you want to be as a project manager. It's what you want to be as a company. It's the type of culture you want to create in construction. It's too easy to burn out if you're fully in reactive mode all the time. Other key factors attributed to successful projects: you've got a well-defined scope, as I mentioned, extensive early planning. All right. Planning early is important. You can't plan everything, and you shouldn't plan things to death that you never get anything done, but you definitely want to take the time and energy to plan things out to reduce reaction mode and reduce waste. So leadership, excellence, management, and frontline supervision. You really want to have excellence in leadership. You want to have well-trained staff, and you want to have people that communicate very well what's going on, and there's a lot of transparency on your project. I see projects all the time where they're trying to conceal this, conceal that. They can't even keep track of what they're trying to conceal, and it usually bites the PM or the site super that does that. And it doesn't make for a positive team culture. But if you have a very collaborative, transparent, engaged team, it does provide for a positive team culture. And you definitely, a big push in construction over the last 5 to 10 years has been to fully engage your subcontractors and large suppliers that are integral to your projects. If you get them engaged and committing to time frames and committing to qualities of work, you're much more likely to meet that, and it's going to be a less stressful process. And you're engaging people that know a heck of a lot more than you do about their specialties. You're talking about a trade contractor that spent their whole life in that trade, has become a manager in that particular trade, or a foreman. They know how to do their stuff better than you do. So what you have to do is be able to engage with them and figure out how their stuff integrates with everybody else's stuff. And then you have to maximize that engagement to wring out efficiencies on your projects. So we have to also be okay with things are going to change. Things are going to happen that we didn't expect. Clients are going to change different things. Materials, they're all of a sudden not accessible. So you have to get a change in process, a change in methodology, how you build things. I think the best way to view these things is to be able to embrace them and not, sort of counter them in a negative way, to be positive about them. And we talked about change in the first week, so you got an idea what I'm talking about when we say change and adaptable and agile responses. You positioned yourself so you can respond to it better than your competitors, better than others, and then you will be successful at this. And take a holistic view. Construction is about how everything fits together. In a lot of ways, in the building science area, we think about buildings like the human body. You've got the exoskeleton, the structure of the building, like the bones of a person. You've got basically the skin, which is the building envelope of the building. It's what separates the inside from the outside. You've got your heart, your kidneys, your liver. That's kind of like the building systems that provide fresh air into the building, your heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems. So it's providing the fresh air and the circulation, just like your blood vessels are. And you understand that if one part of that isn't functioning well, then a person is sick. Well, the same thing with a building. And the unfortunate part is buildings then can have that negative impact on its occupants. So think about construction as a holistic, integrated process, and that will help you better understand the connections between the sub-trades and the work they do and how well things go together. Because if you don't, things will occur and the systems will break down, and one problem will lead to a whole bunch of other integrated problems. Some of the key factors for project management, that are trivial to unsuccessful projects. You can pretty much go to the other slide and flip everything I said in a positive way to a negative way if you want. It'll give you the same sort of ideas, but poorly defined scope, you don't know what you're supposed to do. It hasn't been clear, and that happens in construction. And you bid on projects that are rushed. They're called sometimes they're fast track projects. You want to get them going. Or they just rushed a lump sum price contract, which probably should have been a cost plus instead. And then there's all of these changes and everything in your budget's changing, the client's budget, and they're all upset and the time frames aren't working. It makes for an adversarial sort of partnership. Poor management goes without saying. Waste, all kinds of unnecessary waste in construction. I'll mention that throughout the course. Lean construction looks at reducing waste, like the PDCA that I said earlier. Well, that has a relationship to lean manufacturing, which has a relationship to lean construction, which is the removal of waste. Poor communication, poor quality control, poor systems, all of these lead to negative outcomes, right? A big one that also comes up, unrealistic scope, schedules, and budgets. We take this utopian view that everything is going to work perfect. We call that the planning fallacy. We want this project so bad, we tighten the estimate, we tighten the timelines and say a miracle is going to happen, we're going to do it, and then the miracle never comes. So that becomes a problem. It's a known statement, the planning fallacy in construction, and it was actually developed by a Nobel laureate, Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize, and his book Thinking Fast and Slow. If you ever want to read a good book that sort of gets into how people make decisions, that would be the book I would recommend. And he mentions in that book the planning fallacy, where people get this utopian view that they're going to be able to do something much better than they thought. And of course, he uses all his examples in that are of construction projects, right? So usually heavy civil or municipal projects where governments think something's going to happen quicker than it's realistically able to. And then contractors fall into the trap because they want the work, and then they're going to charge extras every time there's a problem with the drawings, and then you get adversarial relationships. Excessive changes, and that leads to that too. If you don't have any of the ones above, then you're going to have a lot of changes to the contract. And changes aren't the utopia that some people think they are for contractors. Just imagine you're working along, everything's going smooth, and somebody says, "Whoa, wait, we're going to change that. You're going to have to go back and fix this so we can change this and go in this direction." It really slows you down. Whereas if you're in flow and things are going well and nobody changes anything, you can be really productive. You get a learning curve and you get basically a good velocity in the work, and you've got a good rhythm in the work. It can be very profitable, but changes can have a negative impact. That and the fact that clients don't want to pay a lot of money for changes. They think, well, you're there anyways, it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. When was the last time you saw a Mercedes going down the assembly line and somebody said, "Whoa, wait a minute, I want Harman Kardon speakers instead of the Bose speakers," and somebody runs out the parking lot to buy those speakers and runs back while everybody waits? That's what we do in construction too often. So that's one of the negatives as well. Not updating project progress frequently and accurately, that could be a whole course. That could be a whole course, and it has been. And I've delivered it many times to different contractors because they run into that problem where they're not doing the updates accurately. And if you don't have accurate updates, you don't know where you are. If you don't know where you are, how can you get back on track? You're lost. So I think of project a success like the bicycle wheel. I used to do triathlons, and occasionally I would have something would go wrong with one of my wheels, and usually there was a couple of spokes. They were either too tight or too loose, and it threw the wheel a little bit out of alignment. And when you got it out of alignment, it wobbles, and you can't cycle too efficiently with a wobbly wheel. And then eventually it just gets that you can't ride it at all. So each spoke is like a component of project management, because there's a lot of components that just by that short list, and that's a short list, by the way, a lot of components that have to work in unison and work collaboratively and work together for you to have a smooth ride. So think of project success like the spokes on a bicycle wheel, and they all have to be perfectly tuned. If one's going a little bit out, then we got to go in and we got to try to fix that and adjust that so that we can get ourselves back on track and running more smoothly. So in project management, we have constraints and goals. So these are the regular constraints that you see, and this will come up over and over again. And you know what? If you have me in other courses, I will do these same slides, because I think it takes a lot of thought to get used to it. It's a fairly simple concept, but it's a concept that should be intuitive to you, and it should be, you know, just sort of there when you look at things going through your head. So there is this areas, and this is standard stuff for project management, professional training, all of that. They tend to call it constraints, and I flip them around and also call them goals. Constraints means you're stuck with this time frame, you're stuck with this cost, you're stuck with this quality. I look at it, we want to meet or beat this time, we want to meet or beat this cost, we want to meet or beat this quality expectation, we want to have 0 accidents and safety. So can flip things around, and that makes it a little bit more of a motivational tool, I find, than just thinking constraints. I look for ways to better engage myself and motivate others as well, which is helpful. So if we look at this, we've got quality versus time and quality against time. So if we want to open a retail store before the holidays and we start rushing to get this done, what happens? Quality goes down typically, right? So quality will go down in those examples. If we take another example, we add stuff to the project. So we keep adding things to the project. If we just look at scope, what do you think it does to, if we add scope to the project? Does it bring the cost down? It's a pretty easy one to answer that one, isn't it? It's going to bring the cost up, right? It's going to be more expensive. And the one that's probably my favorite to think about is time and cost. If you fall behind on a project, right, and you want to get that time back, or even if you don't want to get that time back, you're going to be incurring extra costs because you're going to be there longer, right? So if you shorten the time, it's not going to lower the costs. It's going to increase the cost typically if you have to, if you're falling behind. So let's say you're falling behind the project, then the costs would go up. Now, if you're doing things more efficiently, and that's automatically shortening the time, then maybe, yeah, that's going to lower the cost. But typically, if you've got a client and they come to you, you originally planned to finish this Walmart store, let's say, by February, and they came to you, well, we want it done by October because the Christmas season is coming, we can make a lot of money. If before you say yes, you'd be looking, well, how do I shave 4 months off this schedule? And if it was possible, then you got to ask yourself, well, if we're shaving 4 months off this schedule, what do we have to do that? Oh, we have to work weekends, we have to work longer hours, we're going to have to pay premium time to all the subcontractors, so that's overtime. So that's going to drastically increase costs. Maybe we have to have more people on site, and maybe we don't work quite as efficiently per person when people are so close and tight together. So time and cost kind of work there. And you'd also have to decide, this is the thing that's interesting here, is can we even short 4 months? Like you reach a point called the impossible zone where it doesn't matter how many people you bring, you're already working weekends and evenings, you can't get it done any faster. That's known as the impossible zone. And you might be saying there, what do you mean? It's always possible. No, it's not always possible. Think if somebody wanted to build a giant hospital in the next 2 months. It's impossible because you couldn't get the approvals that you would need to get the permit. You couldn't mobilize everybody in that amount of time. Even if somebody was willing to pay $1 trillion, it still wouldn't happen. So there are these relationships that occur ongoing in every project. George Brown College, our e-building that was built at the time I was acting project manager for technology, because I was acting director for Center for Advanced Building Technology. That building was 3 months behind schedule with 6 months to go. We had an extra 2,000 students coming that September, and we didn't have a plan B. So for us, the top priority was time, right? So we wanted to make sure it was done on time. We didn't make any changes. We didn't want to be said that we caused the delay. We also didn't have too much in the way of money, but we would have spent more money rather than finish late. So there's this old saying that goes, time, cost, quality, pick any two, but you can't have all three. There's a lot of truth to that when you think about it. So you can walk around e-building when you get a chance in the next couple of years, hopefully, and you'll see there's a lot of, I could point out all the quality issues in e-building. One time I had a long deficiency list for it, and there's still a lot of issues. We rushed it, but we got it done. So we met our number one goal of being able to open, because we didn't know what to do with those students if we didn't get occupancy. So that was it, but quality definitely suffered as a result. So that wasn't a great thing in that particular case. A company out west that I've had some people that used to work with them take some of my courses told me, it's Stuart Olson, a big company out west. They had sort of this process where they'd have time, cost, quality, and they would ask the client at the beginning of a project, what is your top priority? Is it time? Is it cost? Is it quality? And so they get a sense, what is that client's top priority? That would help them to make decisions in how they're answering them, right? And if they knew that quality was the number one issue, then when there's issues and responses, they'd make sure they're covering off quality first. If it was cost was the limitation, then their responses wouldn't be coming up with grandiose ideas how to fix something. It would be what would be the low-cost solution to fix things, which would be helpful, because every client and everybody is a little bit different in how they perceive these areas. So those are very good discussions to come at and understand. I also think I mentioned maybe in the last lecture, there's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People that was written in the 1930s by Dale Carnegie. And one of the preeminent points was put yourself in the other person's shoes. Look at it from their viewpoint, and that will help you to make decisions. You don't have to agree with their viewpoint, but you want to understand it. That'll help you to better integrate with them, and also to give them the kind of answers and responses that they would be looking for to make it more satisfactory conclusions. So understanding time, cost, quality is helpful. Think about in the case of the pandemic, if we're looking for things such as a vaccine, well, how soon can you get it? That's a big issue, is time. Another big issue is quality. Quality is a big issue. We don't want to produce something that doesn't work or causes problems or makes people sick. So that's a big problem. Cost, I think there's a lot of money available for it. Cost isn't such a big issue. So time and quality are the two that are being worked on, and cost, lots of money. And in a lot of cases, cost can be related to other things. In the case of cost for a vaccine, it can be related to, well, it's easy to spend billions when you could be saving trillions when you look at the whole economy, right? So really, in the high end game of it, from a governmental point of view, it would be very beneficial that would be a good investment to make. From a point of view, what I mentioned with Walmart before, it might be if it's going to cost an extra $500,000 to get the store ready 4 months earlier and meet the Christmas season, well, that $500,000, if it makes $2 million extra in profit, that's a good decision to make, right? So you have to look also at the higher levels and see how the puzzles fit together. That'll make you, as a project manager, better able to resolve problems, answer problems, and put yourself in very favorable position with your clients. So some common terminology that you'll see in project management: deliverables, milestones, tasks, risks, issues, problems, Gantt chart, stakeholders. Stakeholders, any person that's affected by your project: owner, designers, contractors, subcontractors, suppliers. Community, those would all be other ones. Community is not listed there. I would add community as well. Gantt chart is our schedule and how we do and put that together and manage and monitor that. So we've kind of talked about a lot of these ones. Milestone is a point in time, key dates that establish targets for you to better engage, motivate, and monitor up to those points. So we kind of go through this process in the project management life cycle. Pre-construction, hopefully at this point you've procured the work, so you've run your pursuit and you procured the work. Then your pre-construction, you're in the planning process, you're starting up, getting things going, you're planning your project. You establish benchmarks, which is a baseline schedule, and you baseline benchmark for your costing to monitor. Effort early in the cycle, it gives rewards, so that's the proactive side of management. Then you get into this circle here that I was mentioning earlier, where you're doing iterations, you're monitoring how well the work is going. It's a feedback loop. That's the core of construction management, and you're trying to ensure that reactive management is kept to a minimum. And then, of course, to finish out the project, you have your closeout. And closeout really needs to start planning in the startup. If you want an effective closeout, you don't wait till closeout to start planning for it. You plan for it in the beginning. Putting all of these together: continuous planning, communication, updating, monitoring, revising. This leads to project control. This leads to project success. So on a high level, you can think of it this way. You get a project charter. That's sort of the description of the project. The project manager is assigned, usually from the project manager. The project team starts to get assembled. Create the scope statement. You know, what's involved? What does this project encompass? You're trying to avoid what they call scope creep, where it becomes more things without having planned for it. Take that whole element, this big stuff, and break it down into smaller and smaller levels. That'll get you down to the activity list. And then you start sequencing. What can I do first? What can we do at the same time? Do we have to have them overlap some of the activities? Do we have to wait between some of the activities? So we start to put together the plan, and then we put dates to it when we procured the work. So we're estimating the time, cost of the activities. We're working collaboratively with the resources so that we can put durations on that. We are assigning the resources, and that allows us to put dates to the actual activities. And as Nike says, just do it, right? At that point. So I find that construction is a pretty challenging industry because we do deal with a certain amount of unknowns, weather being a big one. We really don't know day to day what the weather is going to be like, and we have to manage that process, and that throws kind of a wrench in things. So we have to be pretty resilient in working in our planning with that and monitoring that. It's just something that we deal with here, and there is a small percentage of the work that a general contractor does themselves. Usually a GC doesn't do that much work themselves, especially in the Greater Toronto area, Vancouver. They tend to subcontract the work of, say, form work. So all of this forming work being done over here typically is subcontracted in a project like this in Toronto. In a place like Winnipeg or Edmonton or Calgary even, usually that work is subcontracted. So it kind of depends. It's dependent on where you're located. It's because there's such good subcontractors in those areas that they are very competitive. It's not worth it for the GC to do it themselves. But the same GCs that operate in Toronto, when they operate in Edmonton or they operate in Calgary or Winnipeg, they do their own forming, because in those markets the competitors aren't as efficient and good, so they do keep their own workers for that. But it's a small percentage of the work, because you got all the building systems, you got all the cladding systems, you got all the finishes, that's still subcontracted out. Roofing, could go on, landscaping. So that leads to potential for more conflicts and more getting priorities in alignment is always a challenge too between different parties, because some contractors want to get in and get out. They want to not participate in engagement with other contractors. They just in and out. So, when you self-perform the work, it's a little bit different that way. This one here is a restoration project. This would be self-performed. Most restoration companies self-perform a great deal of their work, but it's highly specialized, usually like reinforced concrete, and so they have their crews that they work directly with, as opposed to this, which has a lot of varying different crews. So you really do fit the constraint side in with that role. So the general construction process, the owner developer comes up with the concept, like I mentioned the Collingwood one. They do a market feasibility study, what kind of density, how many townhouses can we build in this area, what kind of return can we get, what are our costs to do this, and they look at it. And then what are the risks? Real estate market changes. We're going to have to wait it out. What are some of the risks, right? And then if it looks like it's a feasible project, they hire a design team, consultants, and that's the design phase. And then the work is bid, it's put out for bidding, and the contractor is hired. So that process is called project procurement. And from the contractor's perspective, it's pursuit. I'm in pursuit of this contract. Contractor then constructs the project based on the project drawings and specification. That's the execution or construction phase. And within that, they have to plan out the project, and then they got the construction phase, and then they got the closeout phase. That comes through that. So usually at a high level, when I say work breakdown structure, if you have a building and you figured out a costing for it, you've got pre-construction that would have a whole bunch of items listed. You'd have construction, and then under construction, you have site mobilization, substructure, slab on grade, superstructure, exterior finishes, building systems, interior finishes, landscaping, and then closeout. So these are high levels that are broken out by cost. And then each of those levels can be opened up into more detail so that you've got activities, and each activity has durations, and you put connections in place, which is the schedule logic, predecessors and successors. And when that all formats together, you assign people to do the work, and then you coordinate that work, and you inspect that work, and you make sure that it gets done. So that's sort of the construction process, going from high level to more detail, right? And then, of course, you have to monitor this, because things aren't going to happen exactly the way you planned. But you can see what's happened. You can see the impact on the rest of the project, and you can make adjustments, iterations. So in a chart form, you could kind of think of it this way: market demands, perceived needs, opportunities if you want to, and construction business management, we could think of those things. Once we've figured that out, define the project objectives, goals, and scope. Also trying to conceptualize the planning and feasibility stage, design and engineering, construction plans and specifications, procurement, completion of construction. This is going to lead to that. Startup, occupancy, people moving in, starting in the building, acceptance of the facility, it's turned over. And then, the facility, it's going to have things that break down, it's going to need new things, it's going to have operations and maintenance ongoing for the useful life of it, and then disposal of the facility. So you go from, what is the highest and best use? What is the highest and best use? And, this no longer has its highest and best use. So that example I used with the shipyards, at a certain point, disposal of that facility. There were buildings there was all kinds of equipment, everything gone, right? Brownfield gone, and now something else gets constructed in that process. That's the way the life cycle of a constructed facility, from a high level view of thinking about it. So that's good. That's pretty much, I'm hoping that's sort of giving you a connection of how we look at the construction industry, how a developer looks at it, how a contractor looks at it, how a consultant looks at it. And we'll get into much more detail on these things as we go along. But conceptually, this should be giving you some sort of concept of the construction industry and how it generally flows out. There's different specialties in different areas that have sort of different nuances to it, to be sure. But I think it gives you a pretty good broad spectrum of things. So we're going to be returning to lecture 2B, where we're going to go into the players that are involved and their roles and give you a good sense of how that works, because now we're looking more at the resources that we utilize in the process of constructing our buildings. So I'm Tom Stephenson. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon. Signing off.